Hi, I'm Pierre Corbinais, the writer and director of Wednesdays, a game dealing with child sexual abuse and incest. And in this talk, I will explain how we managed to make such a game accessible. First, why even make Wednesdays accessible? Well, from its inception, this game was designed with accessibility in mind, and for several reasons. First, we wanted to make the game accessible for the widest audience possible, because while Wednesdays isn't a serious game or a PSA game, it does carry a message, which is that we should talk more about these topics if we want to better protect the children. And we wanted this message to reach as many people as possible, even people who aren't gamers or are afraid of video games. We also wanted to make the game accessible to people with disabilities because, well, that's something every game should aim for. But also because disability is a strong aggravating factor for intrafamilial child sexual abuse. To put it crudely, you have much more chances to be a victim of incest if you have a disability, and that sucks. And that is why we felt making the game accessible was especially important. Lastly, while the game isn't specifically meant for victims of child sexual abuse, we wanted to make sure our fellow victims could actually play our game, whatever their trauma was and wherever they stood on their path to healing. And we wanted them to have a good time, why not? We wanted them to feel better after playing the game than before playing it. That meant giving a very special care to the content warnings, which is accessibility too by book. So how did we do it? Accessibility-wise, Wednesdays is the result of a cooperation between the devs, the Pixel Hunt, our co-producer and publisher Arte France, and two consulting companies, Game Accessibility Hub and EasySurf. As I said before, this project, we had accessibility in mind from the start. And the cool thing is, when you have accessibility in mind from the start, is that it makes the whole process way easier. Since we wanted the game to be playable by gamers and non-gamers alike, we needed the gameplay to be as simple and intuitive as possible. I say gameplay, but since the game is divided in two different phases, we needed to come up with two simple and intuitive gameplays. The first one, in the memories, is basically the gameplay of a visual novel. Characters are talking to each other. We, as a player, pick dialogue options that will influence the conversation. This is not Wednesdays, by the way. This is another visual novel. But while the codes of visual novels are pretty obvious for us gamers, they might not be for everyone. Who is talking here? Am I the girl on the left, the girl on the right, or neither? But in this case, who am I? So we use codes from another medium, much more widespread than visual novels. Comics. We opted for a graphic novel art style, and we used speech bubbles. And the only interaction given to the players was picking dialogue options by clicking or selecting speech bubbles. This might sound pretty limited, but there are actually a lot of things you can explore with such simple interactions. You can borrow from dating sims. You can create some kind of mini games. You can have options that change or disappear when you click on them. You can have options that keep multiplying. Simple gameplay doesn't necessarily mean boring gameplay. The second gameplay phase is Orco Park, a fictional park management video game from the 90s. Here, the player has to buy rides and decorations and place them in their park to keep the visitors happy. While this whole park thing is inspired by the original theme park game, which is atrociously difficult and abstruse, its gameplay is actually much more similar to the beloved or sometimes hated, super casual game enjoyed by millions. Clash of Clans. Everybody knows how to play Clash of Clans. Also, while Orco Park is described as a park management game, there is actually no management at all. You cannot lose or go broke or even make the slightest mistake. It's more of a toy than a game and is mainly designed to offer a place and time to relax after a difficult memory. When we started working with Arte, our publisher, they were already thinking of new ways to improve the accessibility of the game they co-produced and published. One of them being a list of accessibility guidelines and criteria sorted in categories and ranked from 1 to 3, 1 being mandatory and 3 nice to have. This list was heavily inspired and influenced by the existing games accessibility guidelines and Xbox accessibility guidelines that most of you might know. So there were 92 criteria on this list, and we discussed them all collectively with Arte. First, we discarded everything that was non-applicable for Wednesdays, such as an option to disable QuickTime events. We don't have QuickTime events. Or to highlight landmarks and point of interest on the map. We don't have landmarks nor point of interest nor maps. Then we looked at those that were already done by design, and we found out that it was the case for almost a quarter of them. So that's 24 accessibility features that literally cost us €0. For instance, allowing the player to read at their own pace, or never requiring to hold down a button. Then we tried to estimate the amount of work required for each features left, and discarded the ones that were far too expensive for a game like Wednesdays, such as full voice acting, because Wednesdays has a huge amount of dialogues, or more surprisingly, maybe manual save. It might sound like a small thing, but the way Wednesdays was built prevented saving at any point of the game, and adding manual save would have required rebuilding the whole dialogue system, so we only kept the automatic save we currently have. We were left with 30 yeses, 30 features we planned on adding to Wednesdays. We added a new accessibility line on the budget, and Arte accepted to cover these additional costs. In the end, among those 30 new features, there are only 3 of them we failed to implement in the end because they were more complex or more expensive than we planned. The option to reassign game controls on keyboard or controller. The ability to use screen reading software, not sure how that works, and the customization of the game's mouse cursors. Here you have a picture of a diagram of all these options. So we did more than half of them, and 1/4 of them being non-applicable. Wednesdays was one of the very first Arte game to use this list, and they weren't sure at first if that would be a useful production tool to improve accessibility, and as it turned out, it was. So the use of this list now is part of every Arte co-production contract. Now, Games Accessibility Hub. Games Accessibility Hub is an accessibility consulting company focusing on gaming experiences. Basically, they assist game creators, studios, and publishers in better understanding the needs of gamers with disabilities and how to fulfill them. Their services include training sessions and workshops, project consultations, accessibility assessments, and playtests. In June 2024, Arte put us in contact with them, and they played through our vertical slice. You probably already know that, but just in case, a vertical slice is a small fraction of the game which is fully done to get a sense of the final product. In our case, that meant the park and the first scene of the game. Then Games Accessibility Hub came back to us with a scary spreadsheet with dozens of columns and tabs, which turned out to be super thorough and super useful. Every single part of the game, launch screen, option screen, park, scenes, credits, everything has been scrutinized. Every question has been raised. Every problem has been found. They did not spare us. We thought we were doing a good job, and maybe we were, but clearly we still had a lot of work to do. So we got back to work and basically used this document as an accessibility to-do list. A lot of the accessibility was also addressed via playtests. We had two types of playtests for the game, the regular playtests and the accessibility playtests. The regular playtests happened through the whole production, but especially at 3 key moments. The first wave happened on January 23, when we had not even started production yet. The game basically was an interactive fiction back then. Another wave was with what I call the horizontal slice. So the game was playable on Unity from start to finish, but half of the scenes were still using placeholder graphics. So instead of these gorgeous hand-drawn artworks by Exaiva, you got to play with these crappy MS Pen graphics by me. And the last wave was in September 24, after the alpha. We had 40 playtesters in total, mostly friends of mine, and most of the time I was with them, watching them when they played. There was half men, half women, half being regular gamers, while the other half only played video game occasionally or not at all. And lastly, from what I know, 7 of them being survivors of incest and or child sexual abuse, while 6 of them not specifically identifying as victims, but still having some kind of story to tell. Just so you know, none of this was on purpose. I did not try to have gender parity, nor did I actively look for survivors. I guess this is just what my circle of friends look like. Accessibility-wise, these playtests were especially useful to fine-tune the content warnings. Wednesdays dealing with child sexual abuse, such warning sure felt especially important. The very first realization we had is that the most difficult scenes of the games weren't always the one we thought. We expected this scene, suggesting very young child masturbation, being one of the most disturbing one. And for a lot of players it was. But for parents of older children and for child abuse survivors, it was just mildly embarrassing and sometimes even funny. On the other hand, we knew the final scenes of the game were quite intense. I'm talking about the one when Tim tells his story to his mother, and the one where he confronts his incestor. But we did not expect these scenes to hurt people, and yet they did. Because they show a loving mother believing every word Tim says, and they show a somehow cooperative abuser who does not deny anything that happened, and they show a survivor who is able to move on with his life. And not everyone is that lucky, and not everyone has moved on, and it hurts. Why can he move on while I can't? Some players had very strong feelings about that. So it became one of the very first things we addressed in the warnings. Timothy's experience is that of a victim whose family believed him and supported him, who was not traumatized, and who managed to pull through. This may be particularly troubling for victims who have had a different experience. Another interesting thing that came up during the playtests is that often people did not laugh or even smile at my jokes. Because yeah, the game has jokes, many jokes. Some entire scenes are meant to be funny, but people did not laugh. So that was a problem. Either what I thought was funny was not fair, or there was something else. And while debriefing with them in the end, I realized there was something else. They knew Wednesdays was about incest and were not comfortable enough to laugh. They were tensed the whole time, preparing for anything that could happen at any moment, anything related to incest or child sexual abuse. So we tried something new. Little icons that you see before playing a scene. 1 exclamation mark means the scene addresses sensitive topics. 3 exclamation marks means the scene addresses rather explicit content. And 1 question mark means there is no need for alarm. For the players, these icons are a great way to brace themselves before a difficult scene and to play them at their own pace. But they also allow player to relax entirely during the chill scenes, the easy scenes, and to finally laugh at my jokes. I guess the takeaway is that content warnings are not just meant to warn people. They are also very useful to reassure them. And a few months before release, we also had accessibility playtests. They were organized by Games Accessibility Hub, run by EasySurf, and were done via video by 3 experienced testers covering a range of various disabilities, cognitive, mobility-related, and visual. Doing these playtests 3 months before release might seem late, but we did not expect these playtesters to find new problems. We had this consulting work before to find problems and come up with solutions. Now we just needed to make sure we made a good job and hopefully polish the accessibility a bit more. Great news, apparently we did a good job, and thanks to the playtesters' feedback we were able to polish the accessibility a bit more. We wrote better descriptions for accessibility settings, since an accessibility setting is only useful if people understand what it does. We polished the text adjustment for the highly legible font. We slowed the blinking during tutorials. We even added a last-minute accessibility option, which was cursor speed for the controller. And small anecdote, because I was pretty happy with this feedback. While all the scenes in the game are pretty colorful, at some point near the end, there's this scene in black and white, because we wanted that scene to stand out, to feel different. One of our playtesters has achromatism, meaning he doesn't see colors but only shades of gray. And when he played the game, he had no problem with any of the scenes. They all looked good to him. But when he played that scene, he felt something was wrong, different. He said something like, "Oh, for the first time something feels not quite right with the colors." Probably because this scene has much higher contrasts than the other ones. It wasn't really on purpose, but we were really happy to see that this idea of removing the colors worked, even for someone who doesn't see them. In the end, I think we made quite an accessible game. Here's a list of the accessibility settings we have in the game. I should add the link somewhere in the video. we are pretty proud with these results, even though we were not able to implement all the options we would have loved to. Key remapping, for instance. But was it worth it? Let's see. First, how much did it all cost? It's, of course, not easy to calculate how much money went into accessibility. Most of the accessibility costs aren't actually costs, especially when you have accessibility in mind early in the project. Using colorblind friendly colors isn't more expensive than using any other colors. Designing an accessible UI is exactly the same price as designing a non-accessible UI. But let's try anyway. If we had production, pre-production, pre-production, localization, like everything, the game costs 270,000 euros. If we sum up the costs directly linked to accessibility, like the programming, consulting, playtests, graphics, and audio assets meant for accessibility, we get to 12,000 euros. So that's a bit less than 5%. That's not much, but also it's a lot, in the sense that we could have made other stuff with these 12,000 euros. We could have localized the game into more languages, for instance. So, was it worth it financially? Well, that's the elephant in the room. We do not know, and we won't ever know. But Wednesdays sold about 3,000 copies in a year, so it's not even close to breaking even, accessibility or not. But players did take notice, and we had dozens of reviews praising the game accessibility and more specifically the care we put into the content warnings. I especially appreciate the content warnings and non-linear storytelling, allowing me to go at my own pace. They give lots of opportunity to opt in or out of parts. Hopefully it can meet you where you are in your journey. It did for me. The thoughtful details, its storytelling, gameplay, accessibility options, and the space it gives player to recover emotionally made it possible for me to face both the narrative and my own feelings. And my favorite, I felt cared for. But that's not all. I know for a fact that we managed to make a game accessible for everyone, including non-gamers, because I've been making games for 15 years now, and for the very first time, my mother was able to play a game I made. That text says, "I love you, and I am proud of you, your mother." So, yeah, 100% worth it. My father was also able to play the game, by the way, and my 90 years old grandfather was able to play the game too. He's not playing Wednesdays here on the picture, obviously, but I thought it was a funny one. But that's not all. Working on the game accessibility gave us quite a visibility boost, since we won the award for best accessibility at the Pégase, the French Game Award, kind of. One of the few categories Clair Obscur Expedition 33 wasn't competing in. And we also won the Audience Award at the IGF. That's not specifically for accessibility, but I want to believe it helped a lot. But most of all that work on accessibility might actually have saved us money. The game was initially designed to be played with a mouse, but for accessibility we added controller support. And because of that, the game just worked on Steam Deck. No more work required. Still, for accessibility reasons, we added an option to increase the size of text, allowing to play with a very large font. And that made the mobile port of Wednesdays so much easier, because this is something that would have been required for mobile anyway. And this feature probably would have been much more difficult and thus expensive to do afterward without planning it early in production. So yeah, the answer is yes. All that work was definitely worth it, and we hope this will inspire other devs and publishers to take accessibility at heart from the very start of the project. Thank you very much.